All right, let's move over to the wide receivers here, and we're starting with a rookie that has burst onto the scene in recent weeks, and that's Jalen McMillan of the Bucs. He's 91% available. He's got Dallas on Sunday Night Football. Listen, we talked about this over summer after McMillan had a really, really good preseason here, Jay, that we like him, but he's probably not relevant unless an injury happens. Chris Godwin gets hurt. A lot of the targets turn to Cade Otton, but in recent weeks, they've flipped over to the rookie in McMillan, who has now seen 7 and 6 targets over the last 2 weeks and made the most of them.
Yeah, I thought the most likely outcome when Godwin went down is that it was just going to become a very streamlined offense towards Mike Evans when he came back and Cade Otton, but that hasn't really been the case as Otton has receded somewhat. Jalen McMillan has really stepped up, 24% target share over the past 2 weeks. Do you think this is sustainable in this current role?
I do. I mean, you had a banged-up Sterling Shepard coming into this. He missed some practice time, so maybe that plays into some of it because you would think the roles are the same for these guys. But go with the rookie that just has more upside right now, and he's making the most of the targets. And there's a belief here, Pat, rightfully so, that if you're out there with a big enough snap rate with Baker Mayfield, then you're viable. And that's exactly what McMillan has proved over the last 2 weeks where, season highs in receptions and receiving yards in week 15. But the most important part is over the past 2 weeks, the 24% target share.
Absolutely. Being out there with Baker and also just being out there with Mike Evans. I think Mike Evans being back has maybe made them have a little more trust in Jalen McMillan, where they had seemed really leery of throwing Jalen McMillan into the fire. They would ask Todd Bolson, Coach, how do you feel about the rookie Jalen McMillan? And he would say something like, I don't know, you got to be more specific. He just seemed like he didn't even want to talk about Jalen McMillan. They didn't think he was ready. But Mike Evans comes back at 100% health. It seemed like that kind of gave them the confidence that even if they thought McMillan was going to make a few mistakes, that they could cut him loose a little more, throw him more into the fire when it's not all on him and he's opposite and all pro like Mike Evans and Sterling Shepard. It just wasn't working. But Raheem Jarrett, just totally random players were in the mix, and they needed Jalen McMillan to step up. It seemed like Mike Evans gave them more confidence that he could, and he has. Yeah, the target share is rising. The raw target totals have been the highest they've been all year the past 2 weeks. And Jalen McMillan, he's not someone you don't want to add Jalen McMillan and look for reasons to get him into your lineup. But again, you need a second flex. You're really injured at receiver. He has cases where he can post some pretty nice stat lines for you the final 2 or 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and maybe the same case could be made for Romeo Doubs, who less availability, 62%, and I think a lot more volatility, Jay. But he's got the Saints, who, they'll have the second most yards to perimeter wide receivers this season, where Doubs feels like a guy, the tight end mold, I hope he catches a touchdown. Yeah. But there is a decent chance that he catches a touchdown.
Yeah, there is. And look, the Saints, as you mentioned, they've been terrible against wide receivers. Obviously, they lose Marshawn Lattimore, who's their best guy in that shutdown role. And yeah, if you want to roll the dice with Romeo Doubs, how lucky do you feel playing Packers wide receiver roulette? He's scored 12 touchdowns over the past 28 games, over the past 2 seasons. So he does get in the end zone. So there is upside there. And he was fine. He was very good last week with the 2 receiving touchdowns. But again, fantasy playoff season on the line. Do you really want to go down with Romeo Doubs? Ideally, I think you're not starting any Packers wide receiver. And even Tucker Kraft was the guy that we felt best about going into last week at the pass catches. Relative to position, he doesn't do much at all. So still think Jaden Reed is the guy that you most want of this group. Christian Watson has a lot of upside because of his ability to be kind of rich man's Marquez Valdez-Scantling with the deep ball. And then Romeo Doubs just kind of falls in between. And so I think you can probably do better on waivers than Romeo Doubs.
This graphic, Pat, is the exact problem we have with the Packers pass game is some weeks you're sitting there and going, well, I can't figure out who's going to get the target share. And then other weeks, the game goes by and you go, oh, cool, everybody got between 2 to 5 targets, which didn't help anybody. How do you decipher this group? Obviously, the Packers have a good offense, but that doesn't mean it's a great fantasy offense besides Josh Jacobs and Jordan Love.
It's just almost literally impossible to predict. Jaden Reed had 0 targets 2 weeks ago. And
right.
One of the worst fantasy moments of the entire season for a lot of people. And Doubs is a certified touchdown scorer and a red zone threat. But as Jay was getting at, it's just so tough to start someone when the spiked weeks are so rare. If you're in the wide receiver 4, you want someone who can maybe flip a matchup for you. And Romeo Doubs, he's kind of more of a floor play as a wide receiver 4. There's just so little ceiling potential. Jordan Love has attempted more than 30 passes 1 time since Halloween and 0 times in the past 5 weeks. And the Saints are a great matchup for receivers. But Green Bay is just going to be all too content to run the ball 35, 40 times. And there's just too little spiked week potential, I feel like, to rely on someone like Romeo Doubs and such a crowded supporting cast with just such an uncertain target share.
Our latest character in, touchdown-dependent wide receivers, which is a very weird phrase here, Pat, is Quentin Johnston, who's 59% available. He's got Denver on Thursday Night Football, which not a lot of fantasy managers want to see the Denver defense right now. But the bottom line is with Quentin Johnston, 10 targets in Week 15. He only catches 5 of them, but he scores a touchdown, and he scored in 5 of his past 7 games. This feels like another variant of Doubs where you're taking a risk, and yeah, there's a world where it pays off, but man, it feels like a big risk in the semifinals, right?
It feels like a big risk, but things are trending a little better for him than Doubs. Right? He's had 2 of his 3 highest target totals over the past 3 weeks. He's caught 5 passes in back-to-back weeks. He had not caught 5 since week 2. We know the Chargers are so desperate for healthy targets in the receiving game, and the really big problem is the running game is just dead for the Chargers. Like, what's his? I'm forgetting Gus Edwards' name. That's probably a great sign for Gus Edwards that I can't even recall his name. But a team that wants to be run-based just has nothing going on the ground. And Gus has actually gotten less efficient. Say J.K. Dobbins has been out, where almost like he has to be a change-up. So it's all through the air right now for the Chargers. And Quentin Johnston, listen, we know there's going to be some boneheaded drops. We know he might not be the most efficient, but the raw volume is trending up. It can keep going up. There's room to grow there, really. And you don't feel great about Patrick Surtain, but the Broncos have actually been allowing a ton of receiver production. Surtain is banged up. So the very classic, you don't feel great about it, but if you were just looking at a spreadsheet, you'd probably feel okay with Quentin Johnston as a wide receiver 3 and definitely as a wide receiver 4.
So my man QJ has more receiving touchdowns this year than CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown. That's what he's been dependent on, but it's what he's been able to get. I think with Surtain was an estimated full practice yesterday. Seems like he should be fine and good to go. And all of the Broncos' receiving production has basically come opposite Patrick Surtain,
going the Jerry Jeudy effect.
Yeah, so that was the game that epitomized the Broncos' pass defense, is that Surtain gave up 2 catches to 20 yards to Jerry Jeudy, and then the other corners gave up over 200. So I think that it's just a matter of where does Surtain go and who lines up against him. I think the Chargers' offense is such that he's not going to need to shadow anyone in particular. If Ladd McConkey passes to the perimeter, then Surtain will probably go there. But Quentin Johnston, again, he is just got to think about him as a touchdown-dependent tight end. That's basically what he is. Yeah. He just happens to play wide receiver.
All right, our last wide receiver here, guys, Rashod Bateman against the Steelers. He is 75% available. This is a Saturday game. Keep in mind when setting your lineups, very important to note here for Rashod Bateman. 20% target share over his past 5 healthy games. More importantly here, Jay, he's scored in 3 of his last 4. So you notice a trend with our waiver wired wide receivers today is that a lot of them are touchdown dependent, but that's why they're out there on the waiver wires.
Yeah, and he is high upside with, obviously, Lamar Jackson as his quarterback. And also the thing, too, is that it's not just about the touchdowns, it's that he's had a 20% target share over the past 5 weeks. And there was the thought that Diontae Johnson coming in, that was going to just completely marginalize Rashod Bateman. Well, Diontae Johnson is a complete non-entity on this team, on this roster. And so Bateman has maintained relevance as a result of that. And look, going against the Steelers, who do have a really good defense, but it's a really good defense that is built around its pass rush. The corners aren't amazing. They are vulnerable to the deep ball. And so Lamar Jackson, pretty good at evading a pass rush. So I think there will be explosive plays to be had. Again, if you want a high variance option, Rashod Bateman, you can probably do worse. In terms of just a median outcome, it's probably not amazing, but he does have high-end outcomes like we saw against the Giants.
Yeah, my first inclination with Rashod Bateman is to be a hater. Like, has this guy ever had a big game, when it mattered? He's drawn more than 5 targets all year. As you guys alluded to, Steelers-Ravens is probably going to be a rock fight. But then as Jay also alluded to, it's not just the touchdowns. It is the target share. Sometimes that doesn't amount to much, and an offense doesn't throw that much. But it's the long touchdowns. It's not just scores. Right. It's long scores. And that is what kind of makes Rashod Bateman, even if he's such a threat to give you a 0.0, he's just like an ideal, break glass in case of emergency wide receiver 4, because he might get you a 0, but he's the kind of wide receiver 4 that also might flip your matchup, and your opponent would be like, I cannot believe I lost. because Rashod Bateman scored a 56-yard touchdown. That's a very achievable outcome with Rashod Bateman, and the risk speaks for itself, but so does the upside.
Rashod Bateman molding into like Bizarro MVS was not a plot twist I saw coming here, but it legitimately feels that way with this arc of his career. Let's go to the quarterbacks here, guys, and before we do, we got to break down some news. Mike McDonald, the Seahawks coach, obviously. Geno Smith got optimistic signs on the tests that were run on his knee. They're saying he hopefully will practice throughout the week. So if you are in a 2-quarterback league in the semifinals, if you're obviously in Superflex and Dynasty and you're starting Geno, have a contingency plan, but there is a little bit of hope for you. And then if not, and you need to hit the waivers, which I know aren't as likely in Dynasty, but definitely more so in redraft leagues.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.